Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two very special guests. One very regular guest, Sam Payton from the Save Loch Lomond campaign. So Sam, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great, Kenny. How are you?
I'm very well. And on the other side of me, a bit less regular of a guest, but no less welcome, Craig Berry from the SNP Commonweal group. So Craig, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant. Well, we start as we always do with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there had been a total of 118,573 coronavirus tests concluded. Of these, 103,069 were confirmed negative and 15,504 tests were positive. There were 706 people in hospital with the suspected or confirmed coronavirus infection last night, 20 of whom were in intensive care, with another 14 with suspected COVID-19 also in intensive care. This marks an increase of 53 confirmed new cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection has sadly risen to 2,386. This number only includes those who have died in hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures available show that 39,728 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 359. This number refers to deaths in all settings, not just those in hospitals. And as it's Wednesday, we have the report from the National Records of Scotland published today. And as at the 31st of May, 3,911 deaths have been registered in Scotland, where the novel coronavirus was mentioned on the death certificate, according to statistics published by National Records of Scotland today. Between the 25th and 31st of May, 131 deaths related to COVID-19 have been registered, a decrease of 99 from the previous week. Deaths involving COVID-19 as a proportion of all deaths has now fallen to 12% in week 22, having reached as high as 36% in week 17. This is the fifth weekly reduction in a row of deaths involving COVID-19. To place these statistics in context, the total number of deaths registered in Scotland from the 25th to the 31st of May was 1,125, 11% higher than the average number of deaths registered in the same week over the last 5 years. Since the 878 excess deaths reported back in week 15, the number of excess deaths has decreased week on week to just 108 in week 22. There were fewer deaths from respiratory diseases, which were down 40, and circulatory conditions, which were down 8, compared to the average for the time of year. As a result, the number of deaths where COVID-19 was the underlying cause, which was 111, was greater than the total number of excess deaths. More than half of all registered deaths involving COVID-19 in week 22 occurred in care homes, 52%, down from as high as 60% in week 18. The number of deaths in care homes fell for a fifth week in a row, down by 56 from last week to 68. And finally, 3/4 of registered deaths involving COVID-19 to date were people aged 75 or over, a total of 76%. And our first story, but before we get to that, if you do want to get involved in the conversation here, you can do that by joining us on Twitter. You can follow us at Broadcast Scot, and you can join the conversation using the hashtag Scotland@7. That's Scotland AT and the number 7. Do please get in touch with us. Let us know what you think about all these stories. We'll bring some of those up on the screen as we go along. But our first story, the World Health Organization and several national governments appear to have changed their policies around COVID-19 based on data produced by an almost unknown healthcare analytics company, according to a report in today's Guardian. The US-based company Surgisphere only has a handful of employees, apparently including a science fiction writer and an adult model. Studies written by the company's chief executive, Sapan Desai, have been published in prestigious journals including The Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, but concerns have now been raised over the validity of the data used and even about how the data was acquired. Surgisphere's greatest claim to fame is a study co-authored by Desai, which purported to show that hydroxychloroquine, the anti-malarial medicine hailed as a wonder drug by Donald Trump, led to worse outcomes for patients with the novel coronavirus infection. Errors were spotted in the number of patients in Australian data used for the study. The Guardian then contacted the hospitals involved and all denied any knowledge of Surgisphere or its database. Other healthcare analysts have expressed surprise and confusion at how Surgisphere, which was established in 2008 as a publisher of medical textbooks, could suddenly have emerged as a global leader in healthcare data science. Its database boasts access to the data of 96,000 patients from 1,200 hospitals worldwide. Desai told The Guardian, Surgisphere has been in business since 2008. Our healthcare data analytics services started about the same time and have continued to grow since that time. We use a great deal of artificial intelligence and machine learning to automate this process as much as possible, which is the only way a task like this is even possible. And Craig, apparently we've lost Craig for the moment, so Sam, I'll come to you on this. What do you make of this story? This apparently quite anonymous company that seems to have still been able to steer significant policy changes by the World Health Organization, by the American and British governments on hydroxychloroquine, and even the Peruvian government regarding another drug which changed its guidelines. What do you make of this story?
It's actually bizarre. It is absolutely 100% bizarre how a company that's basically started off publishing, was it you said, has now went on to be given public health advice, and and you've got governments around the world actually following this. Mm-hmm. It is absolutely bizarre. Did somebody not think of doing checks to see what their credentials were? I mean, that just you start to kind of wonder about all these governments, the US and the United Kingdom, what kind of checks they put in place when they're following, these kind of policies and advice, coming. Because if they're using an AI as well, what data are they inputting? Where are they getting the data from to get the information out? Because obviously, in order to get the kind of modelling and get the data out, you've got to put the data in. So, who's behind them? Who's backing them? Is there any professors or anything actually behind them helping them out? It's just absolutely bizarre. Sorry, Kenny, I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, no, it is.
In this day and age.
It is a very strange story. I mean, obviously, the company could be legitimate. It could have accessed this data legally. But of course, the Australian hospitals, which said they'd never heard of them, suggest that maybe it's not been acquired in an entirely ethical way. And that's something that we've talked about in a number of other contexts. But the security of people's data now is a really major concern that I think healthcare bodies especially, but governments really need to have a think about, don't they?
I think they do. They need to give themselves a kick up the backside as well. I mean, because the thing is, as you said, we don't know where they've got their data from, if it's 100% legit. And we all know there has been cases where places can be hacked. There's information can be sold via different ways. So people's confidentiality or right to confidentiality has got to be questioned. But yeah, I would like to see more information and the involvement with the UK government and who actually basically okayed this from the UK government and why. Because there's got to be a reason, there's got to be a connection. A company that nobody's ever heard of, that nobody knows anything about, suddenly just pops up. Okay, they've been going on for 2008, but they've been working under the radar and since 2008. But this pretty much an unknown company suddenly pops up and is giving governments advice.
Yeah.
So there's got to be. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe my mind's just kind of, the conspiracy kind of running off here. But you just think there's got to be something. There's got to be a connection as to why an unknown company's basically giving advice to government.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the Guardian's story, so we'll leave them to dig a bit deeper and find out what
Yeah.
is going on. But we should just point out as well, the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, have both issued advisory notes on the studies that they have published from this company, or informed by this company. So they are going to dig into the science and see how much of it really does stand up. But we move on now, and billions of pounds would be wiped from the Scottish economy, already hit hard by coronavirus, if the UK government refuses to extend the Brexit transition period, according to new analysis. The transition arrangements currently keep the UK close to the EU and can be extended for 2 years beyond the 31st of December this year, if the UK government asks for an extension by the end of this month. But a new study from the Scottish Government says that if an extension is not agreed, Scottish GDP could be up to 1.1% lower after 2 years. The cumulative loss of economic activity from leaving the EU would be up to £3 billion over those 2 years, on top of the devastating effects of the coronavirus outbreak. The paper indicates there will be further major costs from Brexit for years to come, and also highlights that without an extension or having a free trade deal in place, Scotland's agriculture, fisheries and manufacturing sectors will be especially badly hit. Cabinet Secretary for Constitution, Europe and External Affairs Michael Russell called for maximum pressure to be applied to the UK government to change policy, as the study concludes an extension was now essential to aid any post-pandemic economic recovery. And Sam, unfortunately, we don't have Craig here, because part of the reason we had him here was to talk about this new Commonweal report. We will bring him back on that. But one of the things I was talking about was resilience, and how important it is to be able to have an economy that can deal with crises. And yet here we have a British government that seems determined to pile crisis on top of crisis.
They seem to be thriving in it at the moment and using it for all their excuses for everything that's going wrong. Yeah, basically from my point of view, part of being in leadership or being in government is to prepare for crises or unknown crises and things. And basically with COVID alone, it's shown how unprepared the UK is. And in terms with the EU, with Brexit, yeah, it's just one thing after another. Even before COVID hit, you could actually feel the effect of Brexit, in the economy, slowly starting to kind of drip in, where, I don't know if you noticed, but sometimes when you went to the supermarket, there were certain products that were less of on the shelves and things like that, and you were starting to already see that. And then COVID came in, and obviously it kind of knocked everything completely out of sync. But no, I know today that Andrew Bailey from the Bank of England put out a thing for all the banks to basically start organising and start stepping up for a Brexit no deal, which tells you basically what we've been saying on the show. We think that this is what's going to end up happening. And the thing is, with Scotland, it is going to hit us bad. We are going to be hit. And the other thing, the only thing that might be kind of our saving grace is we're quite innovative. We've got quite a lot of small businesses, self-employed people in Scotland. But even then, we're going to be hit. The economy, it's the effects. Thing is the Scottish Government really, I know we're dealing with COVID right now, and they keep saying we need to deal with COVID. Yeah, we do. But we also need to be dealing with, coming out of the UK to protect, our population regarding Brexit as well, because this is just going to, I dread to think what the effects are going to be.
Yeah. Well, as we say, that extension has to be agreed by the end of this month, so we will keep an eye on that as the story develops. But moving on now, and at Holyrood, Scottish parliamentary and local election terms will be extended to 5 years, in line with the UK Parliament and other devolved legislatures, under changes approved by MSPs. The Scottish Elections Reform Bill, which has now passed its final stage in the Scottish Parliament, increases the election cycle from the current 4-year term. The legislation also enables all 14-year-olds to register ahead of attaining voting age, and bans people from voting in more than one area in local elections, mirroring the law in place already for Scottish and UK Parliament elections. The legislation gives the Scottish Parliament oversight of the work of the Electoral Commission on Scottish elections for the first time. And in order to focus on removing barriers to voting for disabled people, the Commission will report on the assistance provided to people with disabilities at Scottish elections. Sam, what do you make of this announcement? Do you think this is a good thing that we've now got a fixed 5-year term that shouldn't overlap with UK elections anymore?
I don't know. I'm a bit mixed about this one. Because the 4-year we've kind of got used to, and to be kind of now in line with the UK, it kind of makes me kind of fearful regarding for independence. We should be kind of going off on our own now. I don't know what a difference another year's going to make. I guess we're going to see, and I'm sure a lot of political analysis and. You know what I mean? We'll be able to turn around and say, oh, but this, that, and whatever. I'm not an expert in that sense, so I don't know. But in terms of getting more support for disabled for elections, yeah, it definitely is needed. And, getting 14-year-olds to register, beforehand upcoming, I think that's actually quite a good idea. Because it starts getting them, because you find... especially here in Scotland, our youngsters are very politically involved, and they do have their opinions. We can encourage our kids quite young to get an interest in politics. So yeah, I think it's quite a good thing to get them, registered, because it gets them that interest. It gets them, and maybe start thinking along, how politics affects their lives day to day. So,
yeah. I mean, that's it's been shown that the younger somebody has their first vote, the more likely they are to vote for the rest of their life. So, in terms of increasing participation, I quite agree that getting people registered at the age of 14 is a great start. But we move now across the Atlantic, and Mark Esper, the US Defense Secretary, has said there are no grounds for invoking the Insurrection Act, which President Donald Trump had threatened to do in response to continuing protests over the death of George Floyd and endemic police brutality against Black Americans. I've always believed and continue to believe that the National Guard is best suited for performing domestic support to civil authorities and these situations in support of local law enforcement, Esper told reporters at the Pentagon. I say this not only as Secretary of Defence, but also as a former soldier and a former member of the National Guard. The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort, and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act. On Monday night, Trump said National Guard troops must dominate the streets, or he would use the Insurrection Act of 1807 to send military troops to the states where protests have intensified. Sam, what do you make of this, that the Secretary of Defense in the US has come out and said that Trump's idea is not one he's willing to support?
Good on him. Basically, good on him, because Trump is just, honestly, he is just a lunatic, and the more and more time goes on and he's acting more and more like a lunatic, he is, to turn around and use that sort of language is not helping. All he's doing is inciting more hatred and causing more people. And it's giving people who are against the protesters a kind of the okay to go up against the protesters. The protesters have been protesting peacefully. Yes, there has been some clashes in some areas, but the majority of them have been protesting very peacefully. And they've got a right to protest. And the way Trump's language was being used, it was just hateful. And basically, as an outsider looking in, you just think, you're going towards a civil war, effectively. If you start using military and things like that, you're going towards which is quite very, very dangerous, and taking away people's right to freedom of speech and people's democracy as well. To then, if somebody says something or there's protesters that don't agree with the president, he's going to send the military out to you. It's just, he's an absolute bizarre lunatic. He really is. I'm certainly, it's Trump. What can you say? He's just mistake. Nothing surprises you. It's like Johnson. They come out with things and they just. I don't think they actually think about what they're actually saying. I think they think their power is ultimate. And they don't need to answer to anybody.
Well, back at Westminster, Ian Blackford MP has called on the Prime Minister to review UK exports of riot control equipment to the US, following footage of how the weapons have been used on American streets in recent days. The SNP Westminster leader also asked the Prime Minister what representations he has made to his ally Donald Trump on the issue. However, the Prime Minister failed to provide an answer. Commenting, Mr Blackford MP said, watching events unfold across America in recent days and the actions and rhetoric from the American president has been distressing and deeply worrying. We cannot delude ourselves into believing we are witnessing anything less than a dangerous slide into autocracy. It is imperative the UK is vocal on human rights, freedom to gather and protest, freedom of speech, and upholding press freedom in other parts of the world. It would be nothing short of hypocrisy if we were to turn a blind eye to events unfolding in the US. I was pleased to hear the Prime Minister say that Black Lives Matter. However, actions speak louder than words. The UK exports millions of pounds worth of riot control equipment to the US, including tear gas and rubber bullets. The Prime Minister must have seen how these weapons are being used on American streets, and he must urgently review such exports. And do we have Craig back?
Craig, I am back now. Apologies about that.
No, that's fine.
The worst of times.
Yeah, we do only have you on audio at the moment, so we're deprived of your beautiful face. But do you have any thoughts on this call by Ian Blackford for us to stop selling riot control equipment to the Americans while these protests go on?
Yeah, I think it's the right thing that we should be doing. I think that although it is the right direction, I think we also need to look, give ourselves a bit of introspection as well. Because although this thing is happening across the Atlantic, we do have our own injustices on our own shores, and I think we need to recognise them. Because although we are sending, although we're exporting these things across to the US, I know that in Scotland we had a company that was exporting tear gas to Hong Kong, which was then used against the protesters. Yeah. So it would be good for us to be consistent there. I think it's good to call it out in all circumstances. And I also think that if we are to deal with this issue of institutional racism, we need to accept that we have quite a bit of an issue of it here as well. I think I've seen recently that there has been as many BAME MSPs in its history than there has ever been members of the Ewing family. So I mean, we're not exactly in the right direction right now. I think there's about 4% of our population comes from a BAME background, but in our own parliament we only have 1.5% of MSPs, and I think in its history it's only been 1%. So when we talk about proportional representation, that's fair for every. That's perhaps the right direction. Perhaps we should talk about what that means for people with different backgrounds in Scotland as well.
Absolutely.
So I think there's a massive conversation that we can have here, and I think this is only kind of the very beginning.
Yeah. I'm sure this issue it's not going to fall off the top of the headlines for some time, and as you say, I'm sure it will spark more conversation here. But we come now to the story that is one of the major reasons we got you on tonight, Craig, and that's the publication of a report by Commonweal. Scotland's Think and Do tank, the Commonweal, today published a report which it hopes will drive Scotland's economic development as we emerge from the coronavirus crisis. The report, entitled Resilience Economics, sets out a framework for designing and building a different kind of economy to the one rocked by successive crashes and shocks over the last several decades. This new economy would be focused on regeneration of the natural environment, reducing economic inequality, decentralisation of economic and political power within the country, and reducing dependence on globalised supply chains. The report comes as several other organisations, including the Jimmy Reid Foundation this week, have also published studies into how Scotland can build back better after the coronavirus pandemic has receded. It has already been endorsed by Professor Mike Danson of Heriot-Watt University, Kostas Lapatvitsas, an economics professor at the University of London, and Steve Keen, economics professor at Kingston University. Commonweal Director Robin McAlpine said, "The pandemic is a dry run for what is coming soon because of climate change. This is our chance to change how we do things. If that change doesn't happen, our economy will fall over in every crisis, just like the dot-com crash, the banking crisis, and the pandemic emergency. It's time to learn our lesson." And Craig, obviously this report will be a welcome development for you. What did you make of the report? What's the kind of standout part of it for you?
Well, I think it's exactly what we need right now. I think the thing that we need to, certainly within the SNP, is to begin to have conversations about what the future is to look like. I mean, that conversation will take many different forms, but specifically, maybe not so much build back better, but change the way that the whole system works. Because as of right now, it works in the interest of expanding our GDP rather than expanding the welfare and the well-being of our citizens. And I think having that shift in the understanding of what the economy is for, I think that can be really valuable. And the policy that comes out from that as well needs to be a lot more purposeful. So it isn't just about, well, how can we get more money in the pockets of large corporations within Scotland? It's how can we improve local communities? How can we make sure that the local communities can ensure that local wealth in those communities goes to improve the local economy? So this is only the very beginning. Again, this is just a theoretical underpinning of what's to come. So my understanding is there will be a second paper coming soon, which will detail exactly what Scotland should do specifically. So this is all the underpinning of why are we doing this? What are the basis for these policies? And it's all about improving the foundational economy. It's all about improving the building up our domestic productive capacity. Mm-hmm. So building businesses in local communities and make sure that they serve local communities, make sure that our local authorities have the powers to serve local communities themselves. So I think this is a perfect chance for us to. This is a perfect opportunity for us to recognise what's to come. Because mm-hmm. Robin's right when he says that the climate change discussion is still to be had. There's many different crises happening as of right now, and the COVID crisis is only pushing on that. So what's going to happen with automation mm-hmm. in respect to a post-COVID society? From my understanding, and I published something about this today on Bella Caledonia, if anyone's interested in having a read, that automation could potentially have downward pressure on jobs, mm-hmm. so that when we get out of the lockdown, there might not be as many jobs for us to go back to.
Yeah.
What happens in the situation when all these debts that we're accruing, that people can't pay their debts back, businesses can't pay their debts back, what's going to happen there? So it goes to highlight what is wrong partially with our economy. And it is essentially a tester round, because all these other crises are around the corner, and we have to start working on fixing them. And these aren't new crises either. I mean, the environmental crisis is something that's been happening for a very long time. The same way with automation, straight from industrialisation, automation has been a problem that's slowly growing and growing and growing to the point where automation is going to outstrip the rate in which jobs are being created, and that's the fear that we have. So this is the perfect opportunity for us to look at our policy prospectus and ask ourselves, how can we improve our lives? How can we push policy that can improve our local well-being, and how can we improve our national well-being? And I think that's the direction that we need to go.
Yeah, and as you say, Craig, this report from the Commonweal, it's not a set of policy prescriptions. It's a kind of theoretical underpinning. But the Commonweal obviously has produced a number of policy papers which would all broadly fit into this way of thinking. What's been the purpose behind setting up a Commonweal group within the SNP, and how much of an effect have you been having in the short time you've been up and running?
Well, the point of the Commonweal group is to recognise that within the SNP, there's groups of people that support Commonweal itself, there's groups of people that support Commonweal policies, and there's groups of people that feel slightly isolated and don't have this kind of broader conversation going on right now. So once we launched, I actually did a talk in Dunfermline, and I had a councillor approach me after I talked to them about the Green New Deal. And she said, at the very beginning when I heard that he's launched, I was a bit dubious. But having sat here and listened to the policy that you want to push forward, I am fully on board. And I think that's exactly what we need to do, is to go around and start talking about policies, start talking about strategies again across local branches, across the entirety of the SNP, because that conversation's not happening. And it's starting to fuel agitations within local branches. It's starting to fuel agitations within different groups within the Yes movement. I mean, that's why you can see more and more pro-independence parties launching in Scotland. I don't imagine that they're going to do that well. No offence to the people involved with them, but I think it really tells that there's agitation within the party. People don't feel like they're being listened to, and we want to start to have that conversation, listen to what people have within the local communities, what issues they have, and then start to say to them, well, look, here's the things that we can do. Here's the light at the end of the tunnel. It's been very dark and dreary within Scottish politics for a while, certainly within the whole Brexit era, but I think people need to start talking about positives again. People need to start talking about what comes next. And I think even for the no voters, that's what will appeal to them. Because as an ex-no voter myself, what actually made me go into the pro-independent side was listening to things that were coming out of Commonweal, the positive policies, the positive idea of what Scotland can look like. And I think that's something that we need to do. Now, the success that we've had, we have been quite successful in my opinion. We started off talking about the Green New Deal, and that's certainly something that people want to continue to talk about, and that will be something that we will talk about. But we're going to start broadening the scope. We'll be launching within the next few weeks or the next month a policy charter for the Commonweal group, so that people know specifically what policies that we are trying to achieve, what are the outcomes that we want within the SNP. Because we have, it's fair enough to talk about the Green New Deal, it's fair to talk about a resilient economy, but what does that actually mean for ordinary members of the SNP? What does that actually mean for working class communities? And we want to start having that conversation. And yeah, we've certainly been growing, and things have certainly been going in the right direction for us. So I would maybe say watch this space. There's plenty more that we're going to be talking about, and we're going to continue to grow at the rate that we are.
Yeah, well, we will be watching very closely. And Sam, just very quickly before we move on from this topic, what do you think the appetite is amongst the Scottish people? I mean, even just amongst people you know, for this kind of conversation about building a different kind of economy on the other side of this pandemic?
Going by the Save Loch Lomond campaign pre-COVID, the appetite is very large because people are feeling disenfranchised. and they're not getting enough say in their local communities and how they want their local communities to be shaped for the future. And especially now with COVID, they're now seeing this as a way of, it's hitting the reset button and being able to build. And I mean, when we were smack bang in the middle of the Save Loch Lomond campaign, seeing Scottish Enterprise backing basically a huge company, rather than backing local companies and speaking to the locals. I mean, they said they spoke to the locals, which they didn't. Just getting right in there, because we actually had a proper public meeting and said to people, right, what do you want to happen in this area? And it was amazing that, and all the ideas that came up are actually very doable, and a lot of them make a lot of sense. Rather than having a flamingo land or another holiday resort in the banks of Loch Lomond. So yeah, it is there. People want it. They want to be involved in what's going on in their communities, but a lot of the times they don't know how to get involved, and a lot of times they believe that even at local council level, that their views they will be protected. Even with us, part of our area is split in half in terms of the national park boundary. So a lot of people believe, but the national park won't do this, and the national park won't. The national park, they found out that's not the case. So a lot of people up until now have been very, they've wanted to get involved, but they don't know how to get involved. And so, the conversation needs to be opened up and people need to be listened to. And because there is a lot of people out there that want to get more involved in their local communities, but as I say, they just don't know how. They don't know where to start. They don't know the first place to go. Yeah.
The Commonweal obviously do encourage people to get involved, so you can do that. Go and see on their website. And we'll be encouraging a bit of discussion about this. We are having a special show on Friday to talk about the post-pandemic economy, the well-being economy, resilient economy. We're having all of that sort of chat on Friday evening, so I do hope you'll join us then. But we move on now, and the SNP has called for the UK government to put money in people's pockets quickly with an emergency basic payment after the Trussell Trust reported its busiest month ever, with a soaring 89% increase in emergency food parcels in April 2020. The data is compared with the same period last year and also reveals a 107% rise in parcels for children, with the number of families with children in the UK receiving parcels almost doubled. Food banks in Scotland have also seen a 47% increase in emergency food parcels, half the increase seen UK-wide, and recorded their largest ever increase in emergency food parcels going to children during the pandemic, despite swift action from the Scottish Government to increase the Scottish Welfare Fund and ensure food banks can access emergency food. The SNP's Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Neil Gray MP has praised food banks for continuing to work during the coronavirus crisis to provide emergency food to people unable to afford essentials in a safe way, particularly with this unparalleled surge in demand, but has warned that they cannot continue to pick up the pieces for the UK government. Coming to you now, Craig, this is the kind of issue that we would want to deal with in a very different way in a more resilient economy, isn't it?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, there's plenty to say about this. I think when it comes to perhaps policy, I think the very first thing you start talking about is the legal right to food, to ensure that these communities can actually get the food that they need. But one of the issues that we have is that there is an environmental cost or environmental externality to the cost of food, and if we want to try get to a stage where we are being more environmentally friendly, where we are delivering food from local communities, that domestic businesses are able to get involved in those supply chains, well then there's a potential that you could see an increase in the cost of food if you want to substitute imports by building locally yourself, well, you could see an increase in the cost of food there as well. So there's a few different answers to this. But ensuring that these communities have the legal right to food is certainly one of them. We all have the legal right to a home, and you can approach your local council in respect to that. But I think this is perhaps another opportunity to maybe bring in the discussion about a universal basic income, or potentially a food budget. It really depends on the direction that you go with that. So often people seem to look at the universal basic income as a golden bullet policy to solve all problems. But I think perhaps local communities can get more attached to this policy when you start to say to people, look, we need to improve the quality of the food that we have in Scotland. There's a potential that can increase the cost of food. People aren't able to afford food right now as it is, and they should have a legal right to food. And if the cost increases, then it's our responsibility to make sure that those local communities can afford that. And it also puts pressure on local or government bodies to ensure that if we do have a legal right to food, it's their responsibility to make sure that that is achieved.
Yeah.
So to give a little bit of a taster of perhaps maybe some of the things we might be talking about in the Commonweal Policy Charter, the SNP Commonweal Group Policy Charter, that's certainly going to be something that we're going to be expanding on.
Yeah, well, we'll look forward to hearing more about that. I've just been handed some breaking news. This is coming from CNN. Senator Amy Klobuchar, a senator for Minnesota, has said that the Minnesota Attorney General is increasing charges against the former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin to second-degree murder in the case of George Floyd's death, and they will also be charging the other 3 officers involved in the incident. That was a demand of a lot of the protests. The family had said that they wanted it increased to first-degree murder, in fact, and also that the other officers who had stood by and not intervened be charged as well. So it looks like second-degree murder charges now for Derek Chauvin, the officer who actually had his knee on George Floyd's neck, and the other 3 officers will now be charged as well. So obviously it remains to be seen what impact that will have on the protesters, but I guess we'll see more about that later on this evening. We move on now though, and MP Kirsten Oswald has renewed calls on the UK government to change the no recourse to public funds rules so that everyone in the UK has access to the support they need, after Boris Johnson backtracked on his promise to help people in this situation. During his appearance at the House of Commons Liaison Committee last week, after he revealed he was unaware that thousands of people were locked out of available support due to the NRPF rules, Boris Johnson promised to help them, saying that people who have worked hard for this country, who live and work here, should have support of one kind or another. However, today, when asked at Prime Minister's questions about his progress on following through on that commitment, he failed to confirm that he would review the policy. While the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme and the Self-Employment Income Support Scheme are meant to be open to people with no recourse to public funds, many of them do not qualify for other reasons and so fall through the gaps. Due to the rules around them, they are unable to access more traditional forms of support such as universal credit, employment support allowance and housing assistance. And Sam, I know you had the great pleasure of watching that liaison committee appearance by the Prime Minister. First of all, how shocking is it that he didn't even know what no recourse to public funds meant?
I'm going to say it is shocking, but however, I'm also going to say I was surprised that he didn't know. The man is just, he is not, honestly, what can I say? I've got so many words and so many I can't say live on there. We're not really that surprised that he doesn't know. The man admitted that he doesn't even read the scientific papers on COVID-19. And when he turned around and said he was going to look into it, blah, 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 you knew right away that wasn't going to happen. He was caught on the hop and he had to say something. And you could see with the expression on his face, he was pretty much caught on the hop. And it's just absolutely unexcusable the way that people are being, not having access to money, not having access to food at the moment. It is just absolutely unexcusable. There is no excuse for it at all. And it's happening too much at the moment. It's too many people are falling through the cracks. And then this is more so than ever. We should be supporting and helping each other. But it's just, the UK government are just, Kenny, what can I say without getting too angry and without going in a rant?
What we'll do, Sam, is we'll move on to the next story and let you get a wee minute to calm down. The SNP's Shadow Home Secretary, Joanna Cherry MP, has slammed the UK government's plans for public health protections at UK borders as too little too late, saying the UK has been out of step with other countries on this issue for the duration of the pandemic. Plans to introduce quarantine measures for people arriving in the UK were only announced at the beginning of May, over a month after lockdown was announced in the UK and far later than most other European countries. The proposals will not come into force until the 8th of June, meaning the UK has been one of the few countries to have no public health measures in place for people entering the country throughout the crisis. In response to today's ministerial statement, Ms Cherry criticised the plans and said the best way for the Home Secretary to address her failure would be to publish the evidence and advice she has based her decisions on. The Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine at the University of Oxford has said that the effectiveness of quarantine during a viral outbreak relies on the timing and accuracy of the quarantine period, as well as the ability of individuals and healthcare providers to follow quarantine procedures. And Craig, we've asked this on the show a number of times, but you're a guest. We've not asked it before. So why do you think it is that this Brexit supporting government that fought so hard to be able to close Britain's borders is now the only country amongst the EU 27 and Britain that hasn't closed its borders in some form during this pandemic?
Well, I think this kind of highlights the direction that the Tory party and some parts of the Labour Party have been going for a while, perhaps for the past 40 years, that their priority isn't us as people, their priority is private capital. So even when it comes to the way that they've kind of launched the furlough scheme, that we were just talking about 2 seconds ago, is anyone surprised that this is the direction that they've gone? I mean, people were struggling to get their benefits before we had the coronavirus crisis. So the only reason that they have the furlough scheme isn't to make sure that people are well and safe. I mean, they may well say that, but that's not what they really want to do. What they want to do is to make sure that private capital is protected, make sure that people are able to pay off their debts, because if they don't, the economy will crash. And we know that they're too focused on the short term, that they're too focused on the inflow and outflow of capital in the UK, that they've prioritised that rather than looking at other countries to see what they've done well, because other countries have are more. I've spent more time looking after their citizens. I mean, if you look at places like some of the Nordic countries that have done very well, and they've implemented the necessary measures a lot quickly, because they don't have that propensity towards, or so much towards that private capital that the Boris government does. So I'm not at all surprised. This is the problem that we have, and this is exactly something that the resilient economy tries to resolve. That we have an ideologically charged government that are looking out for their friends and not looking out for us as people. And sometimes, in some situations, they might be able to help us as people through the furlough scheme, but it's not really their intentions. It's not really what they are actually in government to do, or what they believe they're in government to do. So, no, I'm not at all surprised. This is one of the reasons why I detest the Tory party, and I think this is one of the reasons why everyone else who is well-minded should also detest the Tory party, both in Scotland and in the UK.
Yeah. Well, speaking of people who are struggling during this crisis, Rolls-Royce has announced a planned 700 redundancies at its Inchinnan plant as part of a series of 9,000 job cuts across its global civil aerospace division. The Inchinnan jobs, which are now being offered for voluntary redundancy, are mostly involved in servicing airplane engines. Commenting on the job losses, the SNP MP for Paisley and Renfrewshire North, Gavin Newlands, said, "The workforce at the Rolls-Royce and Shinnon base have been integral, both in the UK and abroad, to the success of the firm over many years. The job losses announced today is devastating news which will hit workers, their families and the wider community during these difficult times." Throughout the period since the proposed job losses were first announced, the Scottish Government has made clear many times that it is keen to sit down with Rolls-Royce and support the operation at Inchinnan in whatever way it can. That remains the case, and it is vital that the firm engages meaningfully and in good faith to protect jobs and people's livelihoods. Even at this late stage, there is still time for management to have substantive discussions with unions and the wider workforce about what action is needed to weather the current economic storm. And Sam, clearly the aviation industry is facing a lot of difficulties right now. We've seen a lot of airlines grounding their entire fleets. Flights generally are massively down on where they were before lockdown began. What do you make of this announcement? And do you think there is scope for the Scottish Government perhaps to step in and save some of those jobs?
It's a difficult one because there's going to be massive redundancies after COVID, throughout the country, and it's not just going to be the aviation. I know locally we've already had 2 hotels who have announced that they've closed, and I know my brother who works with another hotel had received an email on Monday stating that the company is looking to remodel. And in order to save the company, people may have to take contract cuts in their hours or take voluntary redundancy. So these things are happening right across the board right now, Kenny. And as much as I would love to say, yeah, I hope the Scottish Government can step in, unfortunately, they cannot step in and save everybody. There's going to be tough decisions made, and it's going to be right across the board because at the moment, everybody is losing money, and it's not just with COVID, it's going to be with Brexit as well. And with the borders, the borders, that's just an absolute joke at the moment. They need to get the quarantine and things. It doesn't matter if people can go on holiday or not go on holiday. It's about people's lives. Mm-hmm. So, as I say, I would love to say, I would love to see the Scottish Government turn around and say, save everybody, but as it stands at the moment, as we all know, the Scottish Government has, they're not allowed to with certain things, and they're restricted in what they can do, with budgets and things like that, and with the lovely Westminster and things like that. So we can't do it at the moment under the current status, and that's it is heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking, because there's going to be so many people unemployed. Which is already starting to happen. Yeah.
And Craig, obviously, if we're looking at trying to improve our environmental situation, then we want to reduce flights. But at the same time, we don't want to lose 700 jobs in a what's been historically at times quite a depressed part of the country. What do you think the answer is in a situation like this?
Well, I think it's not so much planning the economy, but rather designing the economy, and that's something that the paper on resilient economics actually says. There's 2 different things that we can do. We can either do something called creative adaptation. So we look at Rolls-Royce, we look at the manufacturing capacities, and then we ask ourselves, can they adapt their business to serve the green industry? Can they adapt their business to serve the wider economic plans for Scotland? And if they can't, then there's other kind of things that we can do, try to protect the business, try to make sure that the people within Rolls-Royce can continue to keep their jobs. But again, that it's a difficult one because it's the aviation industry, and that's not too clear on what's happening here right now. There's a potential for the aviation industry to have a boom in research and development. There's a few promising technologies, some in which actually happening in Scotland. I believe Orkney are working on synthetic fuels to run in the aviation industry. It's not scaled up yet. We don't know how that's going to look, but it's about designing an economy that can make sure that you don't just lose your manufacturing base. You adapt it to something else, or you protect it. So I think that's perhaps something that we can do. But again, the same model applies throughout Scotland, because we have Ferguson Marine. I mean, we could be developing, we could be replacing our entire fleet of ferries that are operated by Caledonia McBrain. We could be developing hydrogen fueled ferries. We're already doing it right now. We're already learning that expertise, and we can expand that. We need to build up our wind energy industry, and we have a manufacturing base, Bifab. I mean, that's another company that had issues with employment. We want to expand. We want to expand alternative transport systems. Perhaps we can look at the Cali Works to do that for the rail systems. So it's looking at all these things, the manufacturing base that we already have, and just ask ourselves, how can we design an economy that has this green infrastructure and is planned for the next designed to live on for the next 50 to 100 years, and then continue to do that. I think that's the direction that we need to go.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm sure these are some of the issues that we will be discussing on Friday. But we move on now. We move on now to our last story of the evening, and in recognition of the additional pressure that unpaid carers are under at this time, the Scottish Government will be making a coronavirus carers allowance supplement payment later this month. This one-off payment is in addition to the regular 6-monthly carers allowance supplement. As a result, eligible carers will get a payment of at least £460.20. This will be paid from Friday the 26th of June. As with the current supplement, carers will not need to do anything to get this extra payment, as it will be paid automatically to people who were living in Scotland and in receipt of carers allowance on the 13th of April of this year. Social Security Scotland will write to eligible carers in advance. And Sam, this story, we have mentioned it before, but this has got to be good news, hasn't it?
It's got to be good news. I was just thinking when you were saying that, I was thinking about Chris there, because this is kind of his thing. So is this going to be helping those who are what's classified as unpaid carers? Are they going to be getting a re-supplement as well?
Yeah.
Because a lot of, if so, then yes, because these people really deserve it, and they're really... and it'll be well, received. So yeah, good news. Yeah, glad to hear it, Kerry.
And Craig, do you have any quick thoughts on this announcement from the Scottish Government?
Well, I'll quickly say that maybe an alternative idea is to look at the idea of a national care service. And look at how we could perhaps bring the workers into the public sector and give them the security that they're actually crying out for.
Yeah, that's a much bigger conversation than we've got time for just now, because we are right out of time. So thank you very much to Craig and Sam. Craig, I hope you're not going to be too angry at us when you look at the picture that we found of you to put up in place of the video stream. So I do apologise. I didn't choose it. We'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well. It's only worth making these shows if we have an audience. So thank you so much for joining us. We do have to ask you to support us a wee bit more though. So if you are able to support us financially at all, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month can make a huge difference to the quantity, the quality, and the kind of programmes that we produce here at Broadcasting Scotland. If you're not able to support us financially, we do understand, and you shouldn't worry about that. Shows will always be free to view on air, online. But you can help us out by letting people know where we are. We don't have a lot of opportunities to market ourselves, to let people know where we are. So we rely on you to do that. So please do follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, or on Facebook. Just search for Broadcasting Scotland. We should be the first thing that comes up. And then share the programmes around. Let people know where we are and what we do. That's the best way you can help us to grow as a channel. And also, if you want to get involved here, there are any number of ways that you can, whether it's working as a journalist to prepare the shows, prepare stories for the shows, whether it's working on the technical side behind the camera, or whether it's being in front of the camera like me. There's lots of opportunities here at Broadcasting Scotland. Just get in touch with us and let us know what you'd like to do, and we will find a role for you. But that is absolutely all we've got time for tonight. Gordon will be back tomorrow at 7 as normal. I'll be back on Friday with that special show looking at a post-pandemic economics. But until then, thank you once again to Sam and to Craig, and thank you for joining us. And until I see you again on Friday and Gordon sees you tomorrow, have a lovely evening. Press the stop streaming button.